Hello and welcome to the 50th anniversary of Earth Day. It's April 22nd, 2020, and my name is Carol Carter from Global Minded. I'm the founder and CEO. We're delighted today to have an expert panel to really reflect on the last 50 years and the kinds of things that actually need to happen as we launch this decade of action, where we know the next 10 years are absolutely essential to what happens for the Earth and the planet, and also the people that need to be part of every piece of what we all do. So Global Minded is about creating a capable, diverse talent pipeline to get more women, people of color, underrepresented into the economic mobility, education, and leadership pipeline. So one of the things that we really look at and we'll be focusing on today is how do we look at all of the situations, climate, COVID-19, through an equity lens. And we have some people who have some very wise and insightful perspectives on that today. So it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Garry Jacobs, and he is part of our sponsors of this week. So we'll share that the World Academy of Arts and Sciences and the Foundation for Climate Restoration and the Alliance Center are all bringing you the programs this week. And we have programs every single day. If you weren't able to join us the last couple of days, you can join us tomorrow and Friday. And all of these sessions will be posted to the Global Minded 2020 YouTube channel. So you can share that if you're a teacher, with your classroom, your virtual students you're teaching, if you're a parent. So we look forward to sharing that out with you. It's now my pleasure to introduce today's moderator, and that's Dr. Garry Jacobs. He's the president and the CEO of the World Academy of Art and Science. He's the chairman of the board and the CEO of the World University Consortium. He is an American author, social thinker, educator, researcher, business management strategist, and focuses on peace and global governance. He's got 45 years of experience working throughout Europe and Asia, and we're delighted to partner with Garry and his whole team. So Garry, delighted to have you and looking forward to today's program.
Thank you, Carol, so much, and good morning to you, and welcome to our panel and all of those who are participating in this program. I'm right now situated in South India, so it's nighttime here, and I know it's morning for many of you. We're spanning the globe on this one. This is a unique moment for Global Minded to be taking this wonderful initiative, and for Earth to be here on Earth Day as well. We're really at what we feel in the Academy is a planetary moment. It's a moment where maybe for the first time so intensely, we're all coming together to reflect on what we're doing as a human race, and how well we're doing in meeting all of the challenges to human well-being and human security. And our question, one of the underlying questions for our session today is, how do we capitalize on this global moment, or this planetary moment, into generating planetary momentum to really see rapid change? And the unique moment we have here is we're in the midst of a crisis, which we all know it, are living with every day on COVID-19. At the same time, we're dedicated to addressing a much greater existential crisis than that with climate change. And so we're going to be looking today with people who have, with a very expert group, wonderful group, who have been working on the existential challenges and how we bring about real change in the society, and what can we learn from what's happening now that will be relevant to us when we really take on the biggest challenge that humanity's ever faced. So with great pleasure, I'd like to just briefly introduce our panelists. We have such a distinguished group in front of us. First is Sir David King, who runs the Center for Climate Repair at Cambridge. He's a former chief climate advisor in the UK. He's working on doing research and testing on the need for climate restoration solutions. He's worked as a diplomat for the UK government on how do we work with other countries on issues of this magnitude. And we're really looking forward to your presentation, David. Thank you for joining us. We also have Dave Cortese, who's a supervisor in Santa Clara County Board, a politician and also a grassroots leader, as I understand. I hope we're going to hear from him on the work he did in introducing and passing the Climate Restoration Emergency Resolution in Santa Clara, which has been taken up as a model and lesson by many other local communities around the world. We're looking for catalytic models, and this one sounds to be very interesting. And then we have Father Jostrom, forgive me if I don't get it correctly, Father, Kuritadam, okay, and who is, he works in the Vatican Dicaster for Integral Human Development, particularly in advancing Pope Francis's Laudato Si. He's focusing particularly, working closely with the Foundation for Climate Restoration. We're going to hear the work that the Vatican's doing and he's doing, and we hope he can give us a global perspective, because that's certainly what the Vatican brings to us. And my colleague, Mila Popovich, who is on the executive committee of the World Academy of Art and Science. She's a leader in many fields, particularly in women's leadership. And she's also on our team of the Academy for a project I'll briefly mention, which we call Global Leadership in the 21st Century. And this is a project that we're doing in partnership with the United Nations in Geneva. And it has great relevance to this event. And rather, I would turn it around and say what we're going to hear tonight has great relevance to our project, because in October, we're going to be going to the United Nations, inviting distinguished speakers as we have on the program tonight and on the other days of this week, to share with us ideas and strategies. How do we fill the global leadership vacuum? How do we break the log jam and the inertia, the resistance that's prevented humanity from using the knowledge and the capacities we have to really grapple more effectively with the critical issues that are there on Earth Day, the critical issue of climate change, and even now with the COVID-19 crisis. And we will be having a conference, an e-conference in June in collaboration with Global Minded, where we're going to bring back many of our speakers from this to go in and explore in even greater depth practical strategies for bringing about change. Now, I'd like to go to the panelists. Let's ask each of them to introduce yourself, and then we'll explore some questions together which are critical for the world we're in. David, please, you first.
I'm delighted to join you today, speaking to you here from Cambridge in the UK. Climate change, quite simply, represents the greatest threat that humanity has ever had to face up to. And we are therefore in a climate change crisis because we have not responded to it in the way we should have. We need to work together, all of us, to manage to generate the pathways to a safer world. Now, I just want to quickly say, why do I describe this as an emergency? First of all, I want to say the climate system has changed more quickly than many of us in the scientific arena had anticipated. So let me just point to one part of the climate change system that impacts on literally all of us, and that is up in the Arctic. The Arctic ice has been melting over the last 20 to 30 years, much faster than was predicted, big positive feedbacks. And the net result is that today, during the Arctic polar summer, more than half of the Arctic Sea is exposed to sunlight. That is absorbing sunlight very rapidly. And that region of the planet within the Arctic Circle is now heating up at 2.5 to 3 times the rate of the rest of the planet. And what that means is, since Greenland is sitting right next to the Arctic Ocean that is exposed and which is warming up, is that Greenland will lose all of its ice. It's going to take time, but when all of its ice is lost, global sea levels will have risen by 7 meters. Now, it may take 100 years, but nevertheless, even with 2 meters sea level rise, we're going to see cities like Calcutta going underwater, many global coastline cities going underwater. So the second aspect is actions. We've been discussing this globally through the United Nations procedures since 1988. And in 2015, we finally got a decision, an agreement to keep the temperature rise, if at all possible, to less than 1.5 degrees above the pre-industrial level. Well, today we're at over 1.1, more like 1.2 degrees above that level. And greenhouse gases are now increasing faster than ever before. Now, we would have hoped at 2015, at that point, that we would see a turnaround, and we're not seeing that. And principally, not because there's been no action. There has been a lot of action, but we haven't got the action spread globally. And so what I'm now saying is what needs to be done, all of us need to do what we can from whatever position we have to focus on what I'm calling climate repair. Climate repair has 3 elements. First, deep and rapid emissions reduction. We will not survive this crisis if we don't get emissions under control. Second, we need to reduce greenhouse gases that are already in the atmosphere from their present level, which is about 500 parts per million, to a level of about 350 parts per million or less. The pre-industrial level was 270. And thirdly, and this is my last point, we need to repair those parts of the climate system that are already threatening our survival. Now, clearly the Arctic is one of those points which need repair. Quite simply, how do we refreeze the Arctic, the Antarctic, and the Himalayas? Thank you.
Thank you, David, very much. And we'll come back to you after we have finished the introductions. I don't see Dave right at the moment. So Mila, there, Dave, you're back. Thank you. Dave, please introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about the work you've been doing.
Yes, thank you very much. And it's really a privilege to be here with all of you and all the distinguished members of this panel. I am a member of the Santa Clara County Board of Supervisors in California. San Jose is the county seat, San Jose, California. We have approximately 2 million people in our jurisdiction, which is comprised of 15 cities altogether, including the city of San Jose and 14 smaller cities. We are also essentially the county seat ourselves of Silicon Valley, the traditional, if you will, maybe original boundaries, metropolitan boundaries of that area. And that's a wonderful thing, ordinarily. In extraordinary technological times, it's a great thing. It's certainly a little bit different now in these extraordinary times of this pandemic. Being in the position that I'm in as one of 5 elected members of our county government, I've been in the position little by little over what is almost a 12-year tenure at this point. I'm about 11 and a half years into my overall tenure on the Board of Supervisors, 3 4-year terms. And we have term limits here. So I will be moving on at the end of this year. That said, to go back to what I was saying a moment ago, I've had an opportunity in a way that actually feels very iterative over the years to get our own county, our county government, and those things that we touch either by being early adopters or by being sort of governmental role models or even by ordinance and implementation. We have iteratively taken a county that in 2008 had 0 environmental stewardship goals, did not have an Office of Sustainability, was really operating in a 1950s or 1960s kind of a model in terms of climate issues, in terms of environmental issues in general. Not to say the county wasn't mindful in doing some things that maybe we would have said back then were ecologically appropriate, but there was just no manifesto as to where we were going in terms of going forward. So we started to add those elements on back in those days. When I say we, it was really just a minority of the 5-member board, a couple of us that were pushing to get things done. Fast forward, we ended up getting the county to the point of being 100% renewable, having the largest energy storage contract, I believe, of a public entity with happens to be with Bloom Energy a few years ago. And probably most importantly, most pertinent, to this group and this audience is the fact that being approached by the Foundation for Climate Restoration last year at about this time, perhaps a little closer to summer, about the notion of putting a greater emphasis on climate restoration. I went to the Board of Supervisors and put forward an initiative, which I believe became the first climate restoration emergency resolution adopted by any government that we know of. And of course, the operative word there being restoration. Folks came to us afterwards, and I was asked the question, why is this different, or is this different, or what is operative about it? Of course, that's a huge question. And that was not just coming from skeptics or cynics, it was coming from people, in the environmental community as well. We were backed by about 24 local organizations as we brought that forward politically, urging the Board of Supervisors to adopt it. And of course, we were able to explain that in terms I don't need to express to all of you because you know the subject matter. But it's been a great opportunity to get local governments now focused, and transit agencies as well. We have separate transit agencies here, typically from our primary local governments, to get them focused on restoration in terms of implementation, in terms of how we actually do business. And that's going forward well enough in one sense. In another sense, and I'll conclude this way, this pandemic, of course, has been a tremendous eye-opener. We were the first county, as I just said, to adopt the emergency climate restoration resolution. We were also the first county in the country to issue emergency orders for sheltering in place, among other things. That was also a more compact, iterative process that led to where we are now in terms of how we're dealing with the public in this emergency. One has to ask why we haven't had the same sense of urgency around climate restoration and climate issues in general, the climate emergency. It has been possible for us, which is encouraging, as a community of 2 million people and beyond. I will say the entire Bay Area is unified at this point, if not the state of California, in terms of its response to COVID-19. But the good news is it tells us that we can pivot quickly as a community once we finally decide an emergency is really an emergency. My concern at this point, of course, with regard to what we all know to be a very real and very immediate and very imminent climate emergency with the same, if not more gravitas than a pandemic, is that people need to come to that same awareness. It's one thing to adopt a climate emergency resolution focused on restoration. It's even better to say we're going to actually implement those restoration strategies. But none of that brings the sense of urgency that almost has to be visceral for the community. And I think we're seeing that, with the pandemic, and realizing that needs to translate to the other emergencies we're facing, particularly climate. So I don't want to go on and on, but I do want to say that I think we're learning. That's the good news. And I think we're not only learning what an emergency really is and how to deal with that, and that we can pivot and deal with it, but we're also learning that a lot of the things that we've been doing that have been exacerbating our climate issues, like traveling 2 hours to face-to-face meetings in fossil fuel vehicles and traveling back when we could be doing those meetings on Zoom like we're doing right now. I mean, what have we been doing, and why haven't we been modeling better behavior all along? Those are some of the questions on my mind. Thank you very much for the opportunity to be here.
Thank you, Dave, very much. We look forward to hearing more from you about your wonderful experience. Father Josh, please tell us about what you've been doing.
So hello from the Vatican. It's a great joy and honor for me to join you and bring you also best wishes and greetings from Pope Francis. We opened the Earth Day celebrations this morning at the Vatican, where Pope Francis dedicated the traditional Wednesday audience on the Earth Day. And I thought of sharing with you three things. I had the privilege of commenting live on his statement for an Italian television. I was very impressed by what he said. So allow me to share three things that struck me. First of all, Pope Francis reminded us that Earth is our common home. And I was reminded of in 1968, when Apollo 8 astronauts, sent us that first selfie of the Earth from space, where we saw one home. And Pope Francis was quoting especially the indigenous communities. They see Earth as a home to live in. It's not a storehouse of resources to be exploited. It's a different perspective. So the first thing I would like to share with you is that we need to recover this perception of Earth as our dear common home. And the second reflection is, if Earth is our common home, we are all a common family. Human family, biotic family, with all of creatures, God's creatures dwelling on this earth. And what struck me, he said also right at the beginning, referring to the pandemic, the COVID-19 emergency, he said, it's only by acting together and embracing the most vulnerable among us that we can face global challenges. And this is what a family does. I mean, a family, when someone falls sick, we all come around that child or that person. And so when we really realize that we are a common family living on earth, the attitude changes. And it's only when we put the weakest at the center that we will become more and more a family. I think there's a lesson here also for the climate crisis. I think what the COVID-19 did, you don't just sit back. And I think we need to show more and more the human face of the climate crisis, which is going to be even worse like. But that strikes a chord with people. So let's put the weakest at the center and emphasize the human dimension of the many crises that we are facing together. And the third thing was another hope, he said. He said we need a movement of people from below. And he said in Italian, and I could see the expression on his face. He emphasized that from below. And he said the Earth Day began that, 20 million people from Norway came together and created a movement. And the environmental movements, the movement began there. So Pope Francis says, and we do, that's the work we try to do at the Vatican, that we need to work at various levels. But let's not forget that unless we get everyone on board, we cannot make a substantial change. And the last thing, part of it, it struck me, Pope Francis was courageous. He said he thanked all those who are involved, the various movements, initiatives, then particularly the young people. He said, our children, they have come to the streets to teach us what is so obvious, that without a livable common home, we cannot survive. And he said, we need more of that. We need people to come together. So these are the three things I would like to share with you by way of introduction. And thank you very much.
Okay, I couldn't get unmuted there. Thank you, Father Josh. Mila, let's hear from you. Tell us what you've been working on.
Delighting to be here, and happy Earth Day to everybody. What a wonderful panel, and I'm honored to be here with you. Today I want to thank Carol and Erica, Dr. Erica Dodds, and Rick, and everybody who has helped, and our entire team on the World Academy of Art and Science for producing a wonderful event and coming together. And I think that's one of the key points that I hear from Father Josh Trum and from Sir David and David Cortese, that this notion of connecting the knowledge and connecting initiatives and then coming forward together in a unified field of action is a significant movement that is happening right now. And to add to what the previous speakers were addressing, this sense of urgency and this sense of immediacy, as well as the sense of intimacy, has been induced by the pandemic. The pandemic essentially administered an inductive process to the long-standing or long overdue rebirthing of humanity and evolution of humanity. And that process centers on shifting of values, of shifting in consciousness, and is affecting every walk of life, every aspect of our lives, every form of human activity on all the regions all over the globe. So it's a very painful inductive process that has created new econopolitical and sociocultural conditions of having to come together, having to figure this out together, and to devise an implementable plan and action, as Dave was mentioning. So in situations like this of collective trauma, we are faced with ways in which we can or cannot respond. In fact, what is being revealed is the capacity to respond or not. What is being revealed are also set of relationships that are enabling the capacity to respond or not. So the way in this situation that the state responded to society has been so uneven, so disproportionate all over the world, that the lack of collaboration is the soaring it is an absolute revelation of how we are unable to respond together at the exact same time, where we are deeply interconnected, vitally interconnected, and vulnerable together. With that, we are at the same time, with this vulnerability, seeing the rise of new norms. We are seeing the reversal of notion of progress. And I'll give you a quick example. I originally come from a very small country at the intersection of East and West called Montenegro, 700,000 people with very ancient history. What the state did there, and I'm just going to stage this quickly. Before the pandemic, we had tremendous political tensions in the country. When the pandemic happened, and we were right across from Italy, so really exposed to a center of the crisis, what happened is that the state responded by listening immediately to scientists and experts, devising a strategy, a statewide strategy to address the needs of the society and the people, and as well as to mobilize them and educate them around this needed action, and then used the media not to traumatize, not to raise panic, just to educate and in fact to inspire people to change their behavior to keep everybody safe. We are by far, we in Montenegro, because I share identities, in Montenegro are by far the ones with the best plan and with the least affected people, as well as the loss of life. So as opposed to that, I have moved and have been living for the last 25 years in the US, the Rome of the day, if you will, the absolute powerhouse, economic and military powerhouse in the world. And what we are seeing is lack of collaboration, inability to respond, lack of sense of social, for the well-being, to the point where it's really endangering, and we're upwards of 700,000 infected, and losses that are not even properly reported or people educated or unified around action. This is just, so the sense of prosperity, development, and progress has been reversed, and new norms are emerging. With that, we have and need new kind of knowledge. We are not lacking knowledge. We are experiencing loss of knowledge where there is lack of collaboration. We need new leadership, and the leadership that is capable, that is being trusted and well entrusted to connect institutions, which is formal ways of organizations, with informal ways of self-organizing, which is so important because at the beginning of 20th century, we had 28,000 of non-governmental civil society organizations. Within 20 years span, we have 10 million civil society organizations, which is really an indicative of the need for self-organizing, the voices of the people rising, and the change happening in the streets. And we tend to be, as governing bodies, belated actors on the scene. With the notion of new leadership that is needed to connect governing bodies and self-organizing people voices, we need new change agents that will address and include and incorporate and empower exactly the demographics and the people that Carol is serving with her organization, Global Minded, which is women, the women's organizations, women's interests, children, youth's voices, disenfranchised regions of people, walks of life, because they are not only voicing what is urgently needed, but actually with this pandemic, they have shown that they are the people on the ground that are sustaining the basic needs of us all. And that's the paradox of being disenfranchised and yet being the one serving the greater good of all, and being the hands on the ground and the feet of the ground that are doing this. And this is what should qualify them not only for participation in power, but for partnership in power. In that sense, we need to be evolving more inspired, more integrated, and more inclusive leadership, which now the pandemic has induced this new process of social learning for us all, hopefully for the new structures of social organizing and evolving.
Mila, thank you so much. In fact, the issue you've been speaking on, and several others have touched on, the relationship or the insights or lessons we can learn from COVID-19 relevant to the climate change issue. You mentioned the role of NGOs, and that's a big topic itself. You mentioned the role of the media, which certainly has been dominant in this. I'd like to go back to David and ask whether you think there's something more that we can learn from both the mistakes we've made, or as well as the things we're doing better now than we have done on the climate issue so far. What do you think? What can we learn from this? What more can we learn from this? Please unmute your mic.
This is an amazing opportunity we have to rethink ourselves. And I think that's what each of the speakers has been saying. Let me start by saying, however, humanity will survive the pandemic. And there's the difference. With climate change, if we don't manage this, there's no second chance. So having said that, I believe what we're pointed towards by this COVID-19 outbreak, and I'm heavily involved in trying to manage this in the UK, is that we need to look at a paradigm shift away from our thinking of the 20th century. The 20th century, if I could characterize it in a way that may not agree with everybody, I see it as a Cold War model. And I'm saying Cold War model because what was the greatest expenditure in our societies, the advanced societies, was military. And right now, the British government is investing in renewing its nuclear weapons. Now, if we can get sense out of this whole crisis, it would be, please let's shift all or most of the resources that are pouring into our military arena into dealing with these global issues. And by global issues, I'm going to characterize the situation that we are now in. And Father Jostrom really set it out very well. I believe that we have come to see ourselves as apart from nature, not a part of nature. And that is almost different in terms of our attitude and mode of living. I believe we all need to be focusing on human and ecosystem well-being together. If we take them together, then we know, since we depend on those ecosystems, we, the human part of that, we depend on those ecosystems, our human well-being will be improved by that. We've taken our eye completely off that ball. We have an economic system which puts zero value on the environment. Right? So as we move forward, I think what we have to see is a complete paradigm shift in our thinking. Because frankly, without that, next time we have a pandemic of any kind, we will once again face it with the sort of chaos that people have been describing. We set up the United Nations at the end of the Second World War in a spirit of coming together and in a spirit of helping the weakest. And we have completely lost sight of that. So I think we need to recover a sense of belonging to ourselves and to the earth instead of. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you. So very relevant and rich answer in a few minutes. Thank you, David. Dave, I'd like to ask you, the work that you've been doing in Santa Clara, obviously that the county is an advanced model in many, many different areas. And as I understood in reviewing your material earlier, that what you've been doing on climate has also had wider repercussions or impact around the world in other places. And I'm wondering, is there something we can learn about the role of local communities in not only working locally, but in impacting and organizing and having an impact over a wider area, that maybe we see the paralysis in national governments to quite an degree. We see more lively response from at the local level in the big cities and so forth than we do at national governments. What have you seen that might be replicable, applicable for really mobilizing local communities to work together over a larger area, not only within countries, but possibly internationally as well?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I going back to last summer when we took up the issue of bringing forward this resolution, which is an official government action, drawn up by attorneys, adopted by a parliamentary vote. It wasn't, just something you hang on the wall with a plaque. But as we did that, as we talked about doing that and met with Rick at the foundation and talked about why that would even be needed by a local government. Why would a local government be first? Well, I think the answers are fairly obvious, and I won't get partisan or political about that, but let's just talk about it in terms of expediency. Local governments, as slow as they can be at times relative to other entities, can oftentimes work at what looks like light speed compared to national governments and federal governments. And it was viewed as an opportunity once we discussed that just procedurally, three humans on a 5-member board can take an $8 billion government with 22,000 employees that represents 2 million people in the heart of Silicon Valley, and essentially in a matter of a couple of weeks, set forth the template by legal resolution as to where we need to go next and chart that course. Then you have to look at the idea, which is of course more than an idea. It's implementation strategy. It's organizing. Nothing happens of any significance without some organizing piece to it. That's my belief as an elected official. When I say organized, I mean that on the ground. We have organizations all over the country, that have set up chapters they may not even be directly focused in their mission on the climate issue, but they can certainly carry that message, and they're willing to carry that message. 50 years ago, with the founding of Earth Day in our country, Earth Day and the adoption of the movement was bipartisan. It wasn't a politically contentious issue. And when you get down to the county by county, city by city, town by town, and I believe internationally, province by province, town by town, city by city level, you have everything from Rotary clubs to civil rights organizations to, in our case, we had put together a county climate coalition with Gore's Foundation, with his entity. Climate Reality Project. We had, you have organizations that again are in a very nonpartisan fashion are willing to engage and activate and strategize and help move implementation at the local level. So, there's real potential there for the kind of movement that we need. How you inject the sense of urgency, Mila and others have touched upon that. I touched upon it, is important. Someone was talking about putting a face on it earlier, and it certainly needs that. This issue that we're working on, that we're talking about today primarily, of climate, needs to have more of a face on it. Needs to have some combination of shock therapy, I hate to put it that way, with our community. Our community was jolted by the pandemic and people got it immediately. What brings that urgency to this cause, I don't know, but we need that. We need that to fuel the grassroots movement that we've foundationally set in place.
Great. Thank you so much, Dave. We're going to be running out of time pretty soon, and I've got one very important question I want to put in. I'm going to ask both Father Josh and Mila to respond to it briefly within the time available. And I'm going back to the comment that you made, Father, about the need for a movement of people. I think this is really comes out critically that this is the changes we need, and this is true of COVID too. It has to be done individually, household level, firm level, organization level, community level. But with climate, it's the same thing. We need to get everybody involved and committed. And we've seen with groups like Fridays for the Future, with Greta Thunberg, what difference the youth can make. So I'd like to hear from both of you. What can we do to really generate the awareness and the energy and the initiative at the level of society? We see the governments, especially the national governments, there's so much politics involved, there's so much paralysis, but ultimately it's we the people who are going to get impacted. We're impacted by COVID, the governments are not getting infected, we are. We're going to be impacted by climate change tremendously. What can we do to really build those social movements? You being in a global network of religious groups and interfaith groups, and Mila being in touch with youth groups around the world. Tell us what we can learn and what we can do better than we have so far. Father, you first, please.
Okay. Great question, Garry, and I would reply in two phases. first of all, I think we need to motivate people. And how do we motivate people? I would say at least two strands. First is show the emergency. And I was just recalling more than a year ago when Pope Francis, we had a meeting on energy transition and, with major oil companies and investors at the Vatican. Pope Francis quoted the scientists. He said, the 2018 report had just come out, that we have just a decade to save our planet. So, and he used the word climate emergency. So I think we need to use more and more that. That's how the children came onto the streets, so speak the truth to the powers, and Pope Francis is capable of doing it, and all of us can do it. So let's be more science-based. At the same time, show the element of hope. In the COVID-19 crisis, we have seen so much of solidarity, and there's so much beauty in it. And when we come together, the best of us, the best in us come out. So I think it's important to show, on the one hand, the emergency, and the other hand, the beauty of being together, acting together. And if I might just add also the hope that nature can bounce back. You are just seeing it. I was reading, in Ludhiana in Punjab, they're able to see the Himalayas 230 kilometers away after 30, 40 years. And we are seeing nature bouncing back, allowing nature to rest. Nature can. So we need, on the one hand, emergency, the crisis, science-based. On the other hand, show elements of hope. And the second part of my answer is, we need to work on partnerships. Just as you were mentioning, we need children, we need women, we need indigenous, but not just goodwill, we need to articulate that. And that's what I would like to share, what we have been trying to do for more than a year at the Vatican, that we think this decade is crucial. So we are getting our schools, our parishes, our dioceses, and there are thousands of them, universities, businesses, hospitals, farms, religious orders, and we want the first group to begin. Our idea was to begin in the month of May, but they will have to postpone it to the fall or later, a 7-year journey in which you become totally sustainable. And the idea is 2021, another group, double the number of this group will join, who will begin their 7-year journey, and every year we go on growing exponentially. And this year we thought we would begin with the church. Then the idea is we are already partnering with other churches, then with other religions, civil society, the UN. Imagine the religions are in, they say, 83% of humanity. What a reach out. Then the civil society. So there's a lot of, but then we need to articulate, we need to be intelligent and work it out. And we are working very much on that.
Thank you. Wonderful answers, Mother. Mila, I think we got 2 minutes left, so please.
Thank you. Yes, we have so much to learn from youth, and that is another reversal that we're experiencing. They're so aware, they're so moved, they know where their values and priorities lie, and in so many ways we need to evolve to catch up to our own future. In so many ways, I am fascinated by these strategies for motivating, mobilizing, and organizing for change, a collective society, collective initiative for change. And I keep wondering, what will it take for the big humanities movement to happen on a day like this, on Earth Day, to really change our ways and to evolve, not only and evolve from being tribal members to being national citizens, to being global citizens, and now to being planetary beings, with a sense of planetary belonging and the planet not being just a home and not just a platform on which we live, but rather an intelligent, vulnerable, sensitive, and sensible system with which we are co-emergent as species and our intelligence is co-independent with. So there's much more at stake here. And when it comes to youth and when it comes to social movements, we need an integral and integrating approach. We can't dispense of old structures, as they will not leave that easily, and they're very well funded. What we need is a bridge, a way of trust, of a looping back effect, feedback, that we can build between powers to be or institutions that exist and the capacities and financing and structures that they have, and the inspiration, the exuberance, the values, and the self-mobilizing learning process that these social movements have. So we need to transform this conflict that we have seen into complementarity, into a new social learning process where we can persuade the institutions and the powers to be that to remain relevant, to remain vibrant and relevant, you have to include the voices of the people. You have to integrate human experience into institution. And by other means also to persuade and explain to social movements that to sustain themselves in most effective ways, they can learn how to better organize and structure their experience for representation in all ways from the institutions. And that is one of the ways, and there are many organizations that are bridging this. One last point I will mention is that we desperately need we need arts and culture to mobilize. We need finance to support, and we need political will at a healthy intersection of political power and social agency to generate new systems of care and support. For that, we need also educational and multi-generational education and bridging. And I think in that sense, Global Minded represents a powerful initiative that is working across all of those sectors and domains.
Thank you, Mila. Yeah.
And thank you all. And Carol, back to you.
Thank you so much, and to each of you. And I just want to add one footnote that we have an opportunity right now. Everyone under 15 years of age around the world, I know certainly in the US, is diverse. And so I think when we are sequestered for the next 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, we don't know how long we're going to be in this mode, we have such an opportunity to bring all manner of diversity so that young people see themselves in the people that are at the table with these kinds of forums. And I think over the next few weeks and the event in June, we're going to collaborate on, I look forward to bringing so many incredible people who are normally not at the table with their voices. And we know from colleges that sometimes, you know, students of color look and they go, well, gosh, they don't see themselves in the people teaching them. So I think what we're committed to is to work with each of you to make the climate movement far more diverse, many more people who aren't necessarily from the place of academia or privilege, and yet they are the ones who will co-create these solutions with us. So we very much look forward to accomplishing that with each of you, and so grateful today for you being here. We want to thank again our sponsors, and we are just thrilled that the World Academy of Art and Science is working with us, and the Foundation for Climate Restoration, and then the Alliance Center. And you'll hear from Steve Sheath tomorrow and his a lot of his team. And we have a program, as I said, for the next couple of days with some wonderful people. This is a way that you can reach all of us. And every day, at the end of the day, we will have the sessions posted to our YouTube channel. So if you weren't able to join us for the entirety of today's session, or you couldn't join us the last couple of days, you can reference that content, share it with your networks. We really want to make sure we can amplify the voice, and that we can really take what those people did 20 years ago and virtually be able to have a huge impact today through our digital footprint, since we're not all marching around in all of our respective cities. So thank you again to Garry and each of the panelists, and all the time that you all have put in with your busy schedule this week to make time for us. So we look forward to seeing you tomorrow, and thanks again for all of your help, and enjoy the celebration of Earth Day and the commitments we all have going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Carol. Thanks. Thank you all.